I have quite the journey in education as a background. I started off being a special education teacher in Chicago Public Schools in 2013. And then I moved out to DC for a couple of years and taught public charter and regular public schools out there. I also, decided to get a little bit more of experience degree-wise. And so I got, because I was teaching secondary education as a high school teacher, special education, I also decided to go ahead and get a little bit more expertise in that. So I got my master's in secondary education as well. And then once I started to continue to practice as an educator, certain things that admin told me was necessary, certain messaging that the district, whether that was in Chicago or DC, that was told to teachers that I had to implement in my classroom just did not make sense to me. And so I started to critically question a lot of the policies and the practices that we had to have, or had to implement rather, as teachers in our classrooms. And instead of continuing to gripe about it amongst my colleagues, I decided to try to figure out exactly how I could be a part of the change and how I could potentially start to be a part of be a part of those that were able to write policies or conduct research that policymakers will ideally be able to use, which led me to, want to get my doctorate in educational policy, and then starting to branch out into community work and figuring out exactly how I can try to amplify the voices of people that look like me, and for how I could try to be a part of transformative policies in public education so that Black babies, brown babies could be able to, get the kind of education they deserved in our education system. I wasn't teaching in Chicago at the time when the school closings happened. I know they have been an ongoing thing for the last 20 years. So I don't have particular experience with fighting myself for school closures, but I do have a lot of research experience. And I also have talked to a lot of community activists, a lot of educational leaders, policymakers about what happened during that time, how it felt. And I have some connection to Harper High School because I, knew some of the administration there, and I've interacted with some of the students there prior to the closure in 2018. When I first heard about the closings, I initially bought into the propaganda of this is necessary for the district, it's beneficial to the students. CPS is broke. We need to be able to consolidate so that we can help students. I wasn't in Chicago at the time. I was on the East Coast, actually. And so I was just watching like news reports and talking to like my family about it. But then as I started to peel the layers back and dig a little deeper, I realized that the most impacted students were those that were already getting the least in the city. And so it wasn't the students on the north side who had underutilized buildings and half empty buildings that were being closed. It was the ones on the south side and the west side, right? It was the ones with the Black kids. It was the one with the majority expert or, teachers who had some longevity there. They're the ones losing their jobs. And so it just made me feel like sad, like this deep, overwhelming sadness because I felt so helpless, like I could do nothing. One, because I wasn't even in the city, but also, even if I was there, I would have been teaching in a classroom, in that classroom space outside of participating in activism, like, the shutting down the schools for 3 days. I know they had a 3-day strike outside of Daly Center, supporting CTU, and, going to board meetings. It seemed like there was so much morale and so much support for those who were trying to keep schools open, but I still felt like they were going to do what they wanted to do anyway. And that's what ultimately ended up happening. The schools closed anyway. And so, yeah, I don't know. I wasn't, like I said, I wasn't in the city at the time, but I did connect with people. I know a lot of teachers in Chicago who were teaching the CPS at the time, and they started to tell me their views. They started to tell me how their school was fighting back against the district and trying to prove to the district that the numbers were good, that they had the math wrong on how many empty seats were in the building, or how their building was utilized in other ways outside of just students in the classroom for teaching purposes. They may have been facilitating community workshops. They may have been doing programs with outside like agencies, community agencies that came into the building, offering different types of services, after school programs. All kinds of things were happening in those buildings. Like, these teachers, these administrators, these students, these parents and families were utilizing these buildings in creative ways. And that seemed like it didn't matter. It seemed like that fact fell on deaf ears when it came to basically the board making a decision. And it seemed very cold. Like, no, these are the numbers. This is what it is. We heard your feedback. Like, we hear you at the community, the community meetings. We hear you at the board meetings, but this is what our data says. And economically, as a business decision, it makes sense to close the schools. But when you think about it, really, why would education be made as a business decision? This isn't the market. This is education. It's supposed to be a public service. It's supposed to be a public good. And whether there was 1 or 2 students in the building versus 200 versus 2,000, those students matter. Their safety and their familiarity in those schools should have meant something. And if I felt like, it didn't. And so many teachers and so many students said the same things. So it was just frustrating, really. I felt like they fought so hard, those teachers, the admin, they fought so hard against the phase out, right? Because if you're telling someone they have 5 years, in 5 years we're gonna close your school, right? Like, how is that supposed to make you feel in the moment? You're gonna feel despair, but you're also going to feel like, maybe, just maybe I could turn it around, right? Like, maybe within these next 5 years, we can do something to prove to the district that we deserve to stay open. We deserve to be here. We deserve to have students routed to our building. We deserve to have, like a full school. And to see over the years as that phase out continues to advance year after year, to see the administration and the teachers, not that they lost hope, but to see that they were starting to realize that no matter how many letters they wrote, how many buses they sent down to the board meeting, how many, all these things that they did, it still seemed like it wasn't enough. And so just to watch, the other schools, when I think particularly back in since 2013, before the moratorium, and how all those 50 schools got closed. Of course, there were schools that had been closed and phased out before that time, but it was such a rapid decision. They had like a matter of months, not even a full year, to kind of figure out how to keep their schools open. Versus Harper, they were a part of that Inglewood. Those schools, they got phased out. They had 5 years, and during that 5-year period, like I said, it felt like nothing they did was able to resonate with the district to say, maybe we should rethink this decision, and maybe we should do what we can to keep the school open and funnel more students into the school and help the administration turn it around. So I think they really did fight until the end. Those teachers, that admin, they fought until the very end. But you could see it wore them down. Like, you could see the wear and tear, on top of still trying to function regularly as admin and teachers to make sure students are educated and supported and safe. They also were fighting this entire other battle. So it was hard to see. I think that it's really important to make sure to build a base, a strong community base where we understand the historical tactics of CPS and how they created division and closures in our neighborhoods, 1. And 2, to also ensure that mobilizing is continuously happening. It's not a response to a district decision, it's we are prepared. And so my goal is to be a part of building that community knowledge, helping people to understand what the history is, helping people to understand tactics that were done before, maybe help to figure out how we can revise tactics, and help to be a part of that preparation, because we know that, it's going to come cyclically. CPS tends to always harm Black schools. That has happened throughout time. And so if we understand that and we have some knowledge base and we have some cohesiveness and we understand mobilizing strategies and we're kind of prepared, I think that instead of being blindsided like how typically it's been with the closures, that, you know, people can put up more of a fight. Hopefully that's the hope, right? So even as an educational researcher, even as someone who's a part of like educational leadership in CPS, or I have been in the past, I would hope to be a part of that resistance by just being present and just working alongside people who care, because that's what's going to propel us forward. Will always be people who are going to say, your school doesn't matter. These kids are not being educated. You're inadequate. You know, you don't deserve to stay open. But we already have the resources. We have the tools. We have the community to push back. I think that might make more of a difference. I'm hoping that might make more of a difference anyway. And I would love to be a part of that fight. It's a continuous fight to make sure that our students are getting the equitable services and buildings and quality teachers and quality admin, because they're not going to just give it to us. We know that. So we have to be a part of the change to make sure that we're saying this is what we deserve, we're fighting for it, and A, B, C, D, this is what we're rolling out to ensure that it's actually going to happen.